Section 3 of The Golden Heart and Other Fairy Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Golden Heart and Other Fairy Stories by Violet Jacob. The story of the Sorcerer's Sons and the Two Princesses of Japan. Once upon a time there were two princesses of Japan who lived with their father in a tall palace. It stood on the banks of a river, and they used to watch from the walls to see the boats plying up and down and the great cranes standing in the shallows fishing. They had never in their lives been outside the gardens, except when they were carried in a litter covered with paintings and carvings, and shut in by curtains. They peeped through the chinks as they went along, and Princess Azalea, the elder, used to tell Princess Anemone long stories which she invented about the passers-by. Once, indeed, when the servants had put down the litter for a moment's rest, Princess Anemone, who was bolder than her sister, though not quite so good at making up stories, had slipped quietly out and gone off for a little exploring expedition of her own, while Princess Azalea sat terrified on the cushions, hiding her face behind her little fan. It seemed an age to her till the truant came back, breathless and rather pink in the face. "Oh, sister, sister, what did you see?" she asked. "And how you have torn your dress! What will Utica say?" Utica was their nurse. She had brought them up since Azalea was born 16 years before. Anemone looked down at her white silk dress, all covered with silver flowers, and at the three-cornered slit which ran right across the front. "Never mind," she said, "I'll sew it up before she sees it. I know where she keeps her needles. Azalea, there was a man with a long staff who scowled at me so. I ran back as hard as I could, but oh, sister, look what I found. The world is a charming place, I know." And she held up a great cream and pink peony. So the two stood, day after day, looking out over the palace wall, two white and gold figures with their hair done up in little knobs on the tops of their heads, and their fans fluttering like butterflies' wings. The sun poured down on them, and the blue sky stretched above, and the great unlimited world, which they knew nothing about, lay all round them. Now the princess's father was such a popular man that there was only one person on that side of the world so much talked about, and that was the sorcerer Bodico. The emperor thought very seldom of the sorcerer, because he had little time for thinking of anything but how to be kind to his neighbors. But Bodico could hardly sleep in his bed at night for thinking of the emperor. He tossed about in his lonely cave, saying under his breath that, come what might, he would make himself the more celebrated of the two. He said it under his breath, so that his two sons, who were lying close by, should not hear him. He did not like his two sons very much. He could not at all make out why the princess's father was more admired than himself, for even sorcerers are stupid sometimes, generally because they think themselves so clever. The real reason was because the old man was so kind, but the sorcerer did not know that. He was clever enough to see that the emperor was more thought of than himself, but he wasn't clever enough to know why. At last he made up his mind that it must be because he was richer, and having come to that conclusion, he determined to steal away the two princesses. Then he would go to the palace and demand a great ransom, in fact half of the emperor's money, and he felt sure that it would be paid. The emperor's garden was full of beautiful trees. In one corner a fountain played, and near this a flight of steps ran up to a summer-house on the wall, in which the princesses sat nearly every day and looked down on the world below. As they were sitting there one afternoon, they saw an old man passing by. It was the same person who had scowled at Anemone when she ran away from the litter, and she pointed him out to her sister. He gazed up at the two girls. Under his arm he carried a kind of guitar. Azalea looked at it with interest, for, besides making up stories, she could sing and play very prettily to a little instrument she had, which was rather like this one. The sorcerer, for it was he, made an extremely low bow. "Shall I sing you a song, my ladies?" he asked. Anemone felt bolder than ever, for was not the wall between them? "Yes, please," she said. Then the sorcerer began to sing, and his voice was like liquid gold. It made one think of all the most beautiful things in the world, of the dawn in the sky, of great birds with white wings, of rushing waters, of prancing horses and waving plumes, of the deep velvet sky with its armies of stars. "Oh, how lovely! How wonderful!" cried the princesses. "Oh, sir, where did you learn those songs?" The sorcerer smiled. "It is this little guitar," he said, holding it up. "It is bewitched. One has only to strike the strings, and the song comes out of it. Your ladyships think, no doubt, that it is I who sing, but I have only to open my mouth, and the guitar does all the rest." Now this was a lie, for the sorcerer's 2 sons made all the songs. They were very clever young men. "Sing one more, please sing one more," cried the princesses. "Very well," replied he, "one more, but that must be the last. Here is one which I hope you will like. It is called The Peach Trees in the Valley." "What a charming name," said Anemone, who was fond of flowers. And the sorcerer sang, "My love sits high in a golden chair, and my love looks softly down. With a golden pin she pins her hair, but it shines like a golden crown. And oh, my love, look down to me, with a smile in your almond eyes, for the blue doves nest in the willow tree, and the spring rides up the skies. Come down, O love, in the morning glow, for the day mounts high, though the hours run slow, and I'll show you where the lilies grow, and the peach trees blow in the valley." But my love looks down from her chair of gold, with a smile in her cruel eyes. Her face is fair, but her heart is cold as the stars in the winter skies. Give me the pin that pins your hair, and stabs like a poisoned blade. Look once, O love, without compare, at the wound the point has made, and come when the morning hours run slow, to see the place where I lie low, where the blue doves nest, and the lilies grow, and the peach trees blow in the valley. The girls were charmed, and as for Azalea, she was so much excited she was almost in tears. "If your ladyships like my guitar so much, why do you not buy it?" said Bodico. "I am very poor, and I am taking it into the city to sell." Azalea wrung her hands. She had never been in such a predicament before. "But we have no money!" she exclaimed. It had never entered the princesses' minds to think of money. Everything they wanted was always there ready for them, and it had never in their lives occurred to them to ask how it came. The sorcerer laughed rather slyly. "But surely his Imperial Majesty will not grudge you the money," said he. "Run, Anemone, run, and ask our father," cried Azalea. "It would be better for you to look at the guitar before buying it," remarked the sorcerer. Anemone was practical, and this idea struck her as being very wise. "Wait," she said to her sister, "we will go down to the gate and see it." And the 2 ran down the stairs with a great rustling of silks and clacking of little heels. When they got out of the door, the sorcerer made another low bow and held out the musical instrument. Azalea took it eagerly in her hand, and at the same time Bodico made a whistling sound. 2 men sprang from behind a bush and threw heavy cloaks over the sisters, winding them so tightly over their mouths that they could not scream, though they tried to with all their might. The wicked sorcerer laughed aloud and ordered his men to carry the princesses down to the river. The garden opened on a lonely piece of waste ground, so they met no one on the way, reaching the shore and embarking under the shade of a thick tree in a long flat boat. Soon they had pushed off and were floating down the stream, Azalea and Anemone lying covered up under some grass matting, and Bodico steering while his men rowed. Behind them the city was losing itself in the distance. When the princesses were allowed to come out of their hiding place, they found themselves in a wide country. The river wound on through stretches of sand. Barren mountains, like great blue stone heaps, covered the desert. They wept very piteously as they sat huddled together. Before them, Bodico's grim image sat stiffly against the sky, and behind them the bare country into which they were going spread for miles and miles. All round was sand, and the dry reeds rustled as they passed. They held each other's hands and sobbed softly for fear he should hear. They would have liked to ask him if he was going to kill them, but they were much too frightened. Besides this, they were very uncomfortable, and they had left their little fans behind. It was all very dreadful. Just before sunset, they stopped by the bare stump of a tree which was sticking up among the rushes. On it sat a black raven, looking very wise and cawing loudly. He looked at the matting which covered the girls, and pointed at the sorcerer with his claw. "What have you got there?" he asked. "Mind your own business," said Bodico, throwing a great stone at him. He flew away, flapping his wings angrily, but he turned his head round as he went, and saw Azalea and Anemone getting out upon the bank. The sorcerer was offering them some horrible black bread and some dried peas, for he did not want them to die of hunger. If they did, he would lose all the money he hoped to get from their father. But they were not hungry, and only shuddered as they sat close together on the sand. "If you don't want any food," said Bodico, "don't sit there whining and wasting my time." And he dragged them into the boat again. The raven spread his wings and flew far away up the river, and when he had gone nearly 100 miles, he saw the emperor's palace underneath him. He lit upon the roof and began to caw and squall at the top of his voice, and to dance in such a way that everybody below crowded to look at him. The emperor, who was inside, put out his head to see what all the laughter meant. The tears had been running down his face as he thought of his 2 little girls who had disappeared so strangely, and his nose was quite red, poor old gentleman, but he rubbed his face on his silk handkerchief and went down to the courtyard, followed by his prime minister. All the servants were collected and were staring up at the raven. "What is this all about?" inquired the prime minister as he strutted after his master. "Sir, it is a raven which is dancing on the roof in a very diverting manner," said a bystander. The prime minister was accustomed to be the principal person in any crowd, and he was not best pleased at finding himself scarcely regarded. Nobody was regarding the emperor either, but he did not think of that. He put on his spectacles and looked up. "How very unsuitable!" he exclaimed, turning his back. "Really, what we are all coming to, I don't know." The bird danced still more extravagantly, and even the emperor began to smile. "Come down from there immediately," shouted the prime minister. "I wonder you are not ashamed of making such an exhibition of yourself." "All right," said the bird, and he flew down, alighting at his majesty's feet, making so polished an entrance that all were astonished. The emperor was much gratified. "What can I do for you?" he inquired. "I have important news," replied the bird, "and I would ask to communicate it." "Impudent scoundrel!" exclaimed the prime minister. "Your right place would be in the cooking pot if you were not so nasty." "It would certainly be fitter for me than for you," observed the raven, "seeing that you are old and tough, and that I am young and tender." "Your majesty must not think of giving the audience unattended," said the prime minister. "This disreputable creature may have some design upon your royal life. Someone should be present." "Anyone, so long as it is not yourself," replied the raven. And with that he hopped into the palace in front of the emperor, who was too much agitated to notice the breach of etiquette. The prime minister hurried after, hoping to get in also, but he was too late, for the guard who stood at the door shut it behind his majesty, according to custom. The emperor seated himself, and the bird stood respectfully before him. "Is it anything about my poor little daughters that you have come to tell me?" he asked, looking very pitifully into the raven's face. "Your majesty is right," was the reply. "I myself saw them not 24 hours ago, but in great distress. The sorcerer Bodico has stolen them away." "Where has he taken them to? Where? Where?" cried the emperor. "They were rowing down the river in the direction of Bodico's country. I have put myself to great inconvenience to bring this news to your majesty, and it is lucky that that pig of a prime minister did not dissuade you from listening to me. Why such a mud-headed gander should be allowed near your sacred person I don't know." "He means well," said the emperor. "He means to put me in a pot if he can get me," replied the raven. "I only hope and trust he may not catch me until I have restored the young ladies to their illustrious parent." At this moment there was a loud knocking at the door. "Who is there?" cried the emperor. "May it please your imperial majesty," said the guard outside. "The prime minister says it is cold in the palace, and that you have forgotten your imperial majesty's muffler, and he will bring it in himself." "What does he say?" asked the monarch, who was rather deaf. The raven repeated the message. "Thanks, thanks. Tell him I am very comfortable," said the emperor. The raven hopped to the door. "Tell him," he bawled, "that his majesty says he is to mind his own business, and keep his bald head away from the keyhole." When the emperor heard what the bird had got to say, he determined to set out with a great force for Bodico's country. When the expedition was ready, they started, traveling in great force. The procession was several miles long, and in the center of it, immediately behind his Majesty, the raven was carried on a silver perch which was made in the form of a bower. Over his head swung a scarlet canopy, like an umbrella, which protected him from the rays of the sun, and under which he languished with all the airs of royalty. This he did because the Prime Minister's litter was close behind, and because he knew that its occupant could see him. The slaves who carried him hated him, for his voice was never silent, and he poured abuse upon them from dawn till dusk. And now we must ask what had been happening all this time to the two princesses. When the raven had flown away from the spot where he had seen them, they were hurried into the boat again, and continued their way till they reached the place where Bodico lived. It was a sandy desert with great rocks in which there were caves. To these caves, which were high up, staircases were cut in the stone, and the sorcerer's servant sat in the entrance of one, boiling a cauldron from which the steam went up in a column. They disembarked, and Bodico marched them up one of the flights of steps. "Here," said he, "is the cave you are to live in. If you want anything to eat, you can ask for something out of the cauldron." Azalea and Anemone were very hungry, so they begged a little food and went into their cave, glad to be away from his terrible eye. After some time they heard Bodico giving orders down below. "Now," he cried to his servant, "I am going on a journey. You are to take care that the princesses do not escape, for if I come back and find them gone, I will put everybody to death for miles round." The servant fell at his feet, and promised he would do all he was told, and Bodico, calling together the men who had rowed his boat, mounted a white donkey with pink eyes and rode away at their head across the sand. When night came, Azalea and Anemone lay down, but they could not rest, and, as it was bright moonlight, they sat at the top of their staircase, looking out over the shining ground. It was not long before they saw two figures ride up and dismount below. They did not know what new enemies these might be, so they crept softly back into the cave and tried to sleep. The sorcerer's two sons, for the riders were none other, were named Tiger and Gold Eagle, for Bodico had thought these names lucky. They had come a long distance, and were very tired, and as, when at home, they inhabited a cave next to the one in which the princesses lay, they went in and threw themselves down on the piles of skins which served them for beds. In the middle of the night, Tiger woke his companion. "Brother," he said, "what is that strange noise?" Gold Eagle sat up. He was very cross at being awakened from his first sleep. "If you annoy me again," he said, throwing a handful of sand at Tiger, "I will get out of bed and beat you." As he spoke, the noise grew more distinct. "There's someone crying close by," said Tiger. "I shall go in and see what it means." Gold Eagle was quite as inquisitive as his brother, so he rose, in spite of his bad humor, and followed. What was their astonishment at seeing two girls lying weeping on the floor. Azalea and Anemone fell at their feet. The sorcerer's sons knew very well that these must be some prisoners of their fathers, and as they disapproved of his wickedness, they were horrified at seeing the distress in which the poor little things were plunged. They soon heard their history, for when the princesses saw how kindly they looked at them, they were only too glad to have someone to talk to, and they implored Tiger and Gold Eagle to protect them. The two brothers were so much charmed that they immediately fell head over heels in love, and it was fortunate that Tiger preferred Azalea and Gold Eagle Anemone, or they might have been a fight. They promised to help them to escape from Bodico and to take them back to their father, for, though that they would be dreadfully sorry to part with them, they could not bear to think of them in the power of the wicked sorcerer. Next day they went to the servant who was left in charge of the captives, and asked where Bodico had gone. "Young sirs," said he, "his honor has gone to consult the illustrious dragon about the ransom which he will ask for the princesses." Now the sorcerer had a friend, a very rich dragon who lived on an island some way off, and it was to visit him that he set out on the pink-eyed donkey. The brothers knew that he could not get back for several days, and they told Azalea and Anemone that they would start as soon as their horses should be rested. It was night when they left. The sky was clear, and the steam from the servant's cauldron rose in the moonlight. When he saw what the brothers were doing, he remonstrated loudly, but nobody listened, so he could only promise to tell Bodico which way they had gone the moment he returned. "You won't get the chance," said Gold Eagle, giving him a cuff, "for you are coming too," and he drove him along in front of them. For 3 days all went well. As the brothers walked while the princesses rode, the horses had not much to carry. They were resting in a wood one day when they were suddenly surrounded by a band of robbers who sprang on them, and before they could resist, tied them to trees while they sat down to decide what was to be done with them. Gold Eagle and Tiger were furious and gnashed their teeth, but there was nothing they could do, poor fellows, for the robbers numbered about 40 to their 2. The head robber came into the circle holding the beautiful embroidered dresses he had taken from Anemone and Azalea. "These are worth a great deal," said he. "If we take them to the dragon, who lives on the island, we shall get a large sum. He is a great collector of curiosities, and we can sell the young men to him for slaves, and the girls too, for that matter. This has been a great find." You may imagine what the princesses felt when they heard that. We must now see what the emperor and his train were doing, and how near they had got to the sorcerer's country. Every night they halted by the wayside, and the Raven had a tent all to himself next to that of his Majesty. It was made of velvet, and the royal arms were emblazoned on it. But had you heard the Raven talking about it, you would have supposed it to be no better than a dog kennel. Nothing was good enough for him. The sentry who walked up and down before it was maddened by the offensive looks which the bird cast upon him as he passed and repassed the door. One evening a shabby-looking rook flew by the camp, and, seeing so fine a tent occupied by one of his own kind, he went up to it, and putting on a sad voice began to beg. The Raven, who was at once in front of a glass admiring a gold collar which the emperor had caused to be put round his neck, stuck his beak in the air. "Sentry," he called, "rid me of this pestilent bird. His presence is an offence to me." But the rook's voice drowned the words. "Sir," he cried, "great sir, let me tell your noble honour's fortune. I see by the glorious jewels on your neck that you must be a king." "No, no, my good fellow," answered the Raven, "you mistake indeed. Your admiration for my person and manners leads you into error." "Then it is easy to see by your appearance that you are some great lord," continued the rook. "There, I confess, you have me," said the Raven, looking down. "Let me tell your honourable lordship's noble fortune," cried the rook again. "A great destiny is in store for you, though to be sure anyone who sees you can read that in your high-born and illustrious eye." "Sentry," cried the Raven, "I have made a mistake. I shall not require your intervention." The rook then approached and humbly began telling his fortune, assuring him that every dignity and honour would be his, that he would die lamented after having ruled the greater part of the earth, and that he would owe all these things to the virtue of his own heart and the lofty perfection of his intellect. "My good creature," said the Raven, "you interest me. Not only do you seem to be in the front rank of the prophets, but you appear to possess discernment of character to a very unusual degree. How have you learnt so many accurate and valuable things?" "Powerful nobleman," replied the rook, "though my appearance is mean, I have yet frequented august society, though I have never, of course, been in the presence of such combined rectitude and splendour as that in which I now find myself. Indeed, I have just come from a place where riches are stored such as seldom have been collected in this world." "Where is that?" inquired the Raven. "I have come from the island of a powerful dragon who has immense wealth and a great collection of curiosities. He has an exalted guest with him at this moment, a man of great note who—" "Vermin, you begin to weary me," said the Raven. "Who is this person?" "The sorcerer Bodico," replied the rook. The Raven started. "And who else?" he cried. "There are also 2 young gentlemen, sons of the illustrious sorcerer, and 2 beautiful young ladies named Azalea and Anemone, whom gossips say are princesses. But they did not arrive with Bodico. They were brought to the dragon by robbers and are now in dungeons. The sorcerer disapproves of his sons, I hear, and would not be sorry to see them put to death." The Raven was all eagerness to give this news to the emperor. "Be off, bird," he said. "I have had enough of your talk." "But the fee, my gracious monarch, my fee for telling your fortune." The Raven fell into a towering rage and began to call for the sentry. The rook snatched up a valuable gold chain from a table and made off as hard as he could go, leaving the Raven unable to pursue him on account of the heavy ornaments he wore. Outside the emperor's tent, the raven set up a great cry of "News! News!" The emperor commanded him to enter, and he related what had happened. "But I divined it all in a dream first," he added, "so when the low creature appeared, I knew exactly what he was going to say." The expedition started with all haste for the Dragon's Island, and sighted it in a few days. It was evening when they approached the lake in which it lay, and they saw the single pine tree which stood on it, and one star shining above in the green of the evening sky. But they had no leisure to admire all this, and pushed on to find that the dragon had gone to a palace some way from the shore, where he was entertaining the sorcerer with a feast. The only persons left on the island were the sorcerer's sons, and the princesses who were confined in dungeons below the dragon's treasure house. The force surrounded the palace in which the feast was going on, and turned their heavy guns on it. The dragon and the sorcerer came out in great horror, and the dragon was told that he would be blown to atoms if the captives were not released immediately and Bodico given up to justice. "Take all I have," said the dragon, "but spare my collection of curiosities." So the princesses were set free, and with them Tiger and Gold Eagle, and the sorcerer was seized, bound, and drowned in the lake. The raven stood by the emperor and surveyed all that was done. "My good fellows," he said to Bodico's sons, "there is no further need of your services. Your behavior has been creditable. You may go." "Do you want your neck wrung?" asked Gold Eagle, who had come behind him, taking him deftly between his finger and thumb. The raven took the first opportunity of retiring among the crowd. Next day the emperor with his daughters started for home, having invited the young men to his court, and they, after bidding the princesses good-bye, returned to Bodico's country to fit themselves out suitably for the visit. So everybody departed in peace, except the sorcerer who was at the bottom of the lake. In a short time Tiger and Gold Eagle arrived at the court. They had inherited all their father's wealth, and they came in such splendor and state that people ran out of their houses for miles round to see them pass. The emperor was much delighted with their appearance, character, and accomplishments, and, above all, with the charming way in which they played and sang. So when Tiger asked him for the hand of Azalea, and Gold Eagle for that of Anemone, he consented readily, and the two marriages took place amid great pomp. Everyone was pleased but the raven, who could not get along with the emperor's sons-in-law. Finally he found it wiser to retire from court, and a fine house was built for him, in which he spent the remainder of his days, and died, at a good age, of a surfeit. End of section 3. Read by Martina A. September 2024.